The ocean was calm that morning, almost too calm. Miles away from the nearest shoreline, the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, a soft blue veil blending water and sky. Captain Luke Myers stood at the helm of his fishing trawler, the Blue Ember, wiping the salt spray off his sunglasses. He had seen many strange things in his 20 years at sea, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to find. It was supposed to be just another routine haul. Luke had gone farther offshore than usual, following a tip from a fellow fisherman about a school of yellowfin tuna. But as he slowed the boat to check his GPS coordinates, something caught his eye, a small shape bobbing in the waves, barely visible between the swells. At first, he thought it was driftwood or debris, but something about the movement felt off. He grabbed his binoculars. The object was moving, erratically, fighting against the current. He blinked twice, his heart suddenly pounding. "That can't be," he muttered under his breath. It was a cat. A cat was swimming, out here, 145 miles from land. "Hold on," Luke said to himself, pulling the boat into neutral and tossing a life ring into the water. The feline was struggling, its tiny legs barely keeping it afloat. Luke quickly moved to the side and knelt down as the boat gently drifted toward the animal. The cat gave a weak meow, eyes wide with fear but still holding onto something that looked like sheer will to survive. Luke reached out, grabbing the ring and carefully pulling the cat on board. Its fur was soaked, its body trembling. Luke wrapped it in a dry towel, stunned not just by the fact that the creature was alive, but that it was even out here in the first place. Back in the cabin, he tried to warm it up with a space heater and soft blankets, gently placing a dish of water nearby. The cat didn't drink immediately, just looked around with big amber eyes, half in shock, half wary of her new surroundings. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random accident. There was no logical reason for a house cat to be out in the middle of the ocean, unless someone put it there. As the hours passed, the cat grew stronger. She began to walk cautiously around the cabin, sniffing corners, inspecting the fishing gear. Luke noticed she had a faded red collar, the kind you might buy from a small-town pet store. No tags, no microchip, just a faint inscription on the inside band, "Whiskers." Luke chuckled, despite the mystery. "You don't look like much of a sailor, Whiskers." But the mystery only deepened when Luke radioed the Coast Guard. He explained the bizarre discovery, expecting maybe a short response or some disbelief on the other end. But the radio went quiet for a long beat, and then a voice crackled through, more serious this time. "Please return to the harbor immediately. We're dispatching a unit to meet you. Don't leave the cat unattended." Luke stared at the radio. "Wait, what? Why?" No answer. Just static. He looked back at Whiskers, now curled up in the corner of the room like nothing unusual had happened. The peaceful image didn't match the weird tension he now felt crawling up his spine. There was something no one was telling him. Luke set a course back to port, his mind racing. Had this cat been on a smuggling vessel? Was it some kind of bioresearch subject? His boat wasn't equipped for conspiracies, just nets, hooks, and bait. But the tone in the Coast Guard's voice made it clear, this wasn't just a lost pet story. As night fell and the trawler cut through the dark water, Luke kept glancing over at the cat, wondering what secrets it might be carrying. He thought about all the strange news he'd heard lately. Vanishing boats, offshore drones, stories of illegal marine labs operating outside national waters. The more he thought, the more he felt the weight of something bigger at play. By the time he approached the docks, lights were already flashing in the distance. Not just the Coast Guard, there were unmarked black SUVs, men in dark suits, and even a helicopter hovering quietly above. Luke's jaw tightened. What kind of cat needs that much security? As he stepped off the boat, cradling Whiskers in his arms, a woman in a Navy uniform approached him. Her badge identified her as Commander Harris. She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she pointed to the cat. "You found her exactly where?" she asked sharply. "About 145 miles out, near the Twin Reef markers," Luke replied. Harris nodded grimly, turning to one of the men behind her. "It matches. We need to move now." Luke didn't like being in the dark. "Look, someone tell me what's going on. I don't care about the politics. Just tell me what I pulled out of the water." The commander paused, then leaned in. "This cat was on board a vessel that went missing last month, classified mission. No survivors were ever found. We assumed everything had gone down." Luke blinked. "Wait. You're telling me this cat is the only living witness to what happened?" "Not just that," she said quietly. "We believe she was carrying something. And we need to find out what." Luke's head spun. He had rescued a cat, thinking he was doing a simple good deed. But now it seemed like that one act had dropped him into the middle of something he never signed up for. As Whiskers meowed gently in his arms, Luke suddenly noticed something strange. Tucked in the wet towel, barely visible, was a small silver disc, smaller than a coin, smooth and cold to the touch. Not something a cat would naturally carry. He didn't say a word. Not yet. The harbor buzzed around him, men barking orders, technicians moving crates, security locking down the entire dock. But in that moment, Luke realized that this wasn't over. Whatever Whiskers had survived, whatever secrets she held, it was only the beginning. And as he looked up to the sky, where another helicopter silently appeared on the horizon, he knew one thing for sure. The truth was still out there. And it was coming for them fast. James couldn't stop thinking about the cat. Even as he steered his sailboat back on course, he kept glancing at the small, soaking wet creature curled up inside the emergency blanket. How had it ended up so far offshore? There were no ships nearby, no oil rigs, nothing that explained why a domestic cat was drifting alone in open waters, 145 miles from land. He kept asking himself the same question: was someone out there? Or was this animal a remnant of something no one yet knew about? He gently patted the cat's head. Its fur was still damp, and despite the trauma it had clearly been through, it didn't resist his touch. Instead, it pressed its head softly into his hand. It wore a faded red collar, but no tags. That didn't make sense either. Most pet owners wouldn't let their animals go untagged, especially if they were wearing collars. Was it abandoned? Lost during some tragic event? By the time James docked at the marina, the sky had turned pale gold. A few early risers were already walking the docks, sipping coffee or prepping their own boats. One old man squinted at James, then looked at the cat in his arms. "You rescued that little thing from the water?" the man asked, scratching his gray beard. James nodded. "Found her swimming near my boat. Out in the middle of the ocean." The old man's expression shifted. He looked unsettled. "You said swimming? Out that far?" "Yeah. That ain't normal," the man muttered, shaking his head. "Cats don't just end up there by accident." That night, James couldn't sleep. The cat, now dry and fed, rested quietly on a blanket near the foot of his bed. But every creak of the boat and every distant splash outside made James sit up and listen. His mind raced with possibilities. A lost pet? Maybe someone had tried to smuggle animals and got caught in a storm. Or, more chilling, was this some kind of message? The next day, James took the cat to a local vet to check for a microchip. The vet, a cheerful woman named Dr. Elaine Monroe, scanned her neck carefully. Nothing. No chip. No record. "She's healthy," Dr. Monroe said, brushing the cat's back. "Well fed, no signs of malnutrition. If she was out there for long, it couldn't have been more than a day or two." James raised an eyebrow. "You're saying she was just out there, floating, for a day?" Dr. Monroe gave a tight smile. "Or she came from somewhere recently. But where, I can't say." James posted online about the strange rescue, on Facebook, Reddit, even a sailing forum. The photo of the cat, eyes wide and fur still matted, quickly went viral. Some called it a miracle. Others thought it was a hoax. One user zoomed in on the background and claimed they spotted something unusual in the waves behind James's boat. "It's too pixelated," another replied. "Could be anything." But James had seen it too. A strange ripple. A shadow, maybe. Something had moved, just beneath the surface. He hadn't noticed it while he was pulling the cat aboard, but now, the still frame made his stomach twist. What if the cat hadn't been alone? A few days later, James received an anonymous message through his website contact form. It was short. Just 2 lines. "You weren't supposed to find her. Forget what you saw. Stay quiet. No name. No email. No return IP." It had been bounced through several servers before reaching him. James stared at it for a long time. He had no enemies. No reason for anyone to threaten him. So why the warning? His curiosity only grew. He began to retrace his GPS coordinates from the moment he found the cat. According to the data, he was in an area marked as international waters, far from any commercial routes. But something stood out. There had been unusual Navy traffic in that zone a few weeks prior. Training exercises, supposedly. But none of them had been officially acknowledged. The cat, still unnamed, had started acting strange too. Not in a harmful way, just alert. She would sit by the window for hours, ears twitching at sounds James couldn't hear. Sometimes, she would stare at a specific corner of the room as if someone, or something, were standing there. James contacted a friend of his, an ex-Navy sonar technician named Mark. He explained the situation, leaving out the anonymous warning. Mark raised an eyebrow. "You sure you weren't near a sub-test range?" "No. I double-checked. It was open ocean. Nothing logged." Mark looked concerned. "There are things the public doesn't get to know. Unmarked drills. Surveillance ops. If you picked something up, or someone, without knowing it, that could explain the heat." James hesitated. But it was a cat. Mark glanced at the photo on James's phone and leaned back. Maybe. Or maybe the cat was just the part they didn't plan on losing. That night, James noticed something else. A small, almost invisible marking under the cat's collar. A tattoo? No, it looked like a serial number. He carefully took a photo and ran it through a few image databases. Nothing came up, except for one obscure result. The number had once been used in a now-defunct research project run by a government-funded marine lab. The project name was redacted, but the focus had been listed: marine-based surveillance and stealth testing. Integration with living hosts. James dropped the phone. This wasn't just a lost pet. And whatever that cat had been part of, it was bigger than anything he had imagined. The next morning, a black SUV was parked near the marina. Two men in suits stood by the trunk, scanning every boat as if they were checking a list. James kept his head down, grabbed the cat, and slipped away before they spotted him. His heart pounded in his chest. He had stumbled into something he was never meant to see. The cat purred softly in his arms. Unbothered. Almost like she knew this would happen. And far in the distance, out past the breakwater, several gray shapes were just barely visible against the horizon, silent, steady, and unmistakably military. James watched them with growing unease. Whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. James didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove to a small rental cabin his friend owned in the hills, far from the coast. He needed time to think. The cat sat quietly beside him in the passenger seat, curled into a small ball of fur, as if she understood the urgency in James's silence. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at him, her eyes steady and unblinking. Not like a regular cat. Almost like she was waiting for something, watching his next move. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun had slipped below the trees and the world had gone quiet. No cell service. No internet. Just the wind outside and the occasional rustle of the leaves. James locked the door behind him, double-checked the windows, and sat down on the couch, the weight of everything finally crashing onto his shoulders. He couldn't stop replaying the images in his mind, the cat drifting in open water, the strange shadow in the waves, the anonymous warning, and now the SUV with those cold, scanning eyes. He kept asking himself the same question: what was this cat, and what had she seen before he found her? Meanwhile, the cat continued to behave in ways James couldn't explain. She avoided reflections, mirrors, glass, even the window at night. And once, in the middle of the night, James woke to find her sitting on the edge of the cabin's old wooden desk, staring intently at the GPS unit he'd brought with him. It wasn't even plugged in, yet she pawed at it gently, over and over, like she wanted it turned on. Curious, James powered up the unit and scrolled through the logs. That's when he noticed something strange. A new waypoint had been added. It wasn't from any trip he remembered, and it wasn't from the day he rescued the cat either. The timestamp was from nearly 2 weeks before he had even sailed out. That didn't make sense. The coordinates pointed to a location even farther out than where he had found her, almost 200 miles offshore. And it wasn't near any shipping lanes or mapped islands. Just a blue patch of ocean on the GPS, marked only with a long string of random characters. Not a name. Not a code. Just nonsense. But James had a gut feeling, it wasn't random. He scribbled the characters down on a notebook and stared at them for hours. That's when it clicked. The characters matched the format used by encrypted naval project designations. He remembered seeing something similar when he visited Mark during his time in the Navy. The next morning, James called Mark again, careful not to reveal where he was. He shared the string of characters. Mark went silent on the other end. Then he asked, "Where did you get this?" James hesitated. "It was in my GPS logged without me doing it." Mark sighed. "That code. I'm not supposed to talk about it. But years ago, I heard rumors of a research vessel that went missing during a covert deep-sea test. It was called Project Echo." Echo? Yeah. Unofficially, it was focused on blending live marine life with reconnaissance tech. They wanted to create something that could pass unnoticed, swim in, gather intel, even deliver micro-payloads. But the program was shut down after the vessel disappeared. They said it was lost in a storm. But if it was shut down, why is this showing up now? Mark's voice dropped. Because they never found the vessel. Some think it went rogue. James felt his throat go dry. Rogue? You mean the tech? I mean whatever they were experimenting with. Some say it got out. Adapted. Survived. James didn't tell Mark about the cat. Back at the cabin, James stared at the feline curled near the fireplace. Was she part of it? Had she escaped from that vessel? Or worse, was she leading something to him? Over the next few days, things got stranger. James noticed birds avoiding the cabin. He spotted drones flying low, even though the area wasn't supposed to have any surveillance coverage. He saw the same black SUV 3 towns over, parked near a gas station, engine running. He knew he was being watched. And the cat, she started trying to escape. Not in a desperate way. More like she had a destination. Every time James opened the door, she would slip toward it, then stop and look back at him, as if urging him to follow. One morning, James finally gave in. He packed his gear, stowed the GPS, and placed the cat gently in the passenger seat again. She didn't fight. In fact, she looked relieved. James didn't know what he was chasing, but he knew he wouldn't get peace until he saw it through. He drove to the harbor and prepped his boat quietly. It was early, and no one asked questions. By the time the sun was up, James was already heading back out to sea, chasing those strange coordinates, chasing the truth. As the coast disappeared behind him, James thought about the subplots unfolding around him, the missing research vessel, the anonymous threats, the mysterious project codenames, and the increasing signs that someone, somewhere, was tracking him closely. He had no evidence. No allies. Just a rescued cat and a gut feeling that whatever he was about to uncover, it wasn't meant for civilian eyes. Miles into the open ocean, James powered down his tracker, using only manual bearings. He knew if they were monitoring satellite signals, they'd see this as a dead zone. He glanced at the cat. She sat up now, more alert than ever, facing the water. Then came a low, humming sound. Not mechanical. Organic. Almost like a whale's call, but deeper. It vibrated through the hull of his boat. The cat stiffened, eyes wide. James turned in every direction. No ships. No planes. Just the rising swell of waves and the sound, closer now. Whatever was waiting out there, it was getting near. And James had just crossed the line between curious sailor and unwilling participant. The water was too still for comfort, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. James stood at the edge of the deck, his fingers gripping the railing, eyes scanning the horizon. The coordinates on his GPS said he was close. But there was nothing around, no signs of ships, islands, or even birds. Just an eerie, perfect blue stretching in every direction. And that low, pulsing sound, it hadn't stopped. It vibrated beneath his feet, soft but steady, as though something huge and hidden was waiting just below. The cat hadn't moved since they reached this spot. She sat facing the bow, her ears twitching slightly with every pulse, eyes unblinking, focused on something only she could sense. James could feel it too now. A presence. Not human. Not animal either. It was like being watched from deep under the surface, but not with eyes, more like with intention. He took out his binoculars and scanned the water again. Still nothing. But as he lowered them, a shimmer caught his eye. Just a ripple, way off in the distance. Then another, closer this time. Circular. Almost deliberate. Like sonar rings. He looked at the cat again, and for the first time since he'd found her, she was trembling. James turned to grab the GPS unit, intending to mark the spot again, but the screen was dead. Batteries were fine. The unit itself was new. But the screen had just gone completely black, like something had knocked out the signal, or jammed it. The humming grew louder. Not painful, but it filled his head like a deep echo inside his skull. And then he saw it, just for a second. A dark shape moving under the boat. Not a fish. Bigger than that. Much bigger. It passed silently, casting a shadow across the hull, and vanished on the other side. James's heart was racing now. He grabbed his emergency flare gun, not that he knew who would come if he fired it. But having something in his hand made him feel less helpless. Then, the boat lurched. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't the wind. The boat jerked sideways like it had been nudged. The engine sputtered. Lights flickered. Then everything went quiet again. The cat jumped onto the railing and stared down into the water. She didn't make a sound. Just stared, tail twitching slowly. James inched toward the edge. He knew he shouldn't look. But he had to. The water was crystal clear here, and just below the surface, he could see it. A shape. Metallic. Covered in what looked like coral or some kind of organic plating. It wasn't a submarine. It wasn't natural either. It was something in between, like a machine that had lived underwater for decades, adapting, evolving. And then, it moved. Not toward the boat. It slid beneath them again, slower this time, circling. James stumbled back, nearly losing his balance. The cat didn't move. She was watching it like she knew it. Like she was part of it. Suddenly, a sharp beeping noise came from inside the cabin. James rushed in and saw his backup radio blinking. It was receiving a signal. But the frequency was off, an encrypted naval band he hadn't touched in years. He picked up the receiver and heard only static at first. Then, a voice. Robotic. Calm. You are not authorized to be in this sector. Turn back immediately. James tried to respond, but the line cut off. Moments later, the sound of rotor blades filled the air. He ran back outside and saw a helicopter approaching fast. Black. Unmarked. The kind that doesn't belong to a country, or at least not one that will admit it. It hovered low, pushing waves out in a wide circle, and from its open side, a man in dark tactical gear pointed directly at James's boat. He didn't speak. Just motioned with 2 fingers, backward. Go. Now. James hesitated. His eyes dropped to the cat, who was still staring into the water. Almost pleading. The man repeated the motion, more urgently this time. James backed away, raised his hands in a confused shrug, but then the water behind his boat erupted. A tower of sea spray shot into the air as the metallic shape beneath finally surfaced, just enough to break the surface. The sound it made wasn't a roar, not mechanical either. It was a deep, thrumming sound, like a heartbeat amplified 100 times over. The helicopter began to retreat. Not attack. Retreat. James turned, stunned. Whatever had risen from the water, it was what they were afraid of. Not him. Not the cat. That thing. The surface settled again, and now James saw it clearly. It wasn't a vessel. Not really. It had no markings, no windows, no sign of propulsion. But it pulsed with energy, soft blue veins glowing across its surface like it was alive. And it had an opening, small, but unmistakable. Just big enough for something to enter. Or exit. The cat leapt from the railing and walked to the edge of the boat. James rushed to stop her, but she turned to him, and for a split second, he hesitated. Her eyes didn't say, "Goodbye." They said, "Trust me." And then she jumped. Not into the water. Into the opening. The structure sealed shut behind her, and the glow along its body brightened for a moment. Then it began to sink again, slow and controlled. Disappearing back into the deep. James stood frozen, heart pounding, his boat rocking gently as silence returned to the ocean. The helicopter was gone. The GPS was still dead. And James was left alone, staring at the calm sea, unsure of what he had just witnessed, or what he had unknowingly become part of. Because this wasn't about a lost cat anymore. It was a message. And someone, somewhere, had just heard it loud and clear. James stood motionless, his thoughts spinning faster than the waves beneath his boat. The image of the cat leaping into the mysterious vessel haunted him. She didn't just jump like an animal following instinct, she moved with purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. That strange underwater machine hadn't been hunting her, it had been waiting. And now, it had taken her somewhere no GPS could track and no man had likely seen before. But what rattled James more than anything was the retreat of the black helicopter. Trained military operatives didn't back down easily. Especially not from an animal. Or a man in a small fishing boat. He gripped the railing and exhaled slowly. The calm around him felt wrong, like the eye of a storm. Then, out of nowhere, a loud crackle of static blared through the dead radio. James rushed inside. The device was off, completely powered down, but it was still emitting noise. Faint at first, then clearer, like a signal pushing through interference. Then a voice came through. This time it wasn't robotic. It was tired, breathless. Human. Turn your boat around. You're not supposed to be here. James froze. Who is this? He shouted, leaning into the mic. Where's the cat? What was that thing? Silence. Then, a whisper, they're listening. You need to run. The line cut off. James stared at the radio, heart pounding. He reached for the power switch, but the screen flickered again on its own. A map popped up. It wasn't his software. It looked military. Coordinates lit up in red, an area marked simply as Sector E9. The same area he was in. As he watched, a dot blinked on the screen, moving fast toward his location. Then another. And another. He scrambled back outside, looking in every direction. At first, the ocean looked empty. But then he spotted them, 3 speedboats, cutting through the water like sharks, headed straight for him. They were moving too fast to be civilian. And they weren't waving him down. There were no sirens. No words. Just dark figures in helmets, gripping weapons. James gunned the engine. His old boat sputtered but caught. He turned away from the oncoming boats and hit full throttle, tearing across the waves. Behind him, the black vessels split apart, flanking him on both sides. They weren't trying to intercept. They were trying to trap him. The cat, the underwater structure, the retreating helicopter, none of it made sense. But now it was clear, James had seen something he wasn't supposed to. And whoever was behind this, they didn't want him talking. The sea roared around him as he veered sharply east, hoping to outmaneuver them near a coral shelf he'd fished around before. His mind was racing. What did they want from him? He didn't have the cat. He hadn't taken anything. Unless it wasn't the cat they were after. Maybe it was what the cat knew. Or what she was. As the speedboats drew closer, a strange pressure hit the air again, like the low-frequency hum he'd felt earlier. But this time, it was stronger. The water beneath his boat vibrated. He turned sharply and looked over the side. The same shape. It was back. Rising fast. Only this time, it wasn't alone. A second structure breached the surface, nearly identical to the first. James's boat rocked violently as the sea surged. The speedboats came to a sudden stop. The men aboard stood frozen, eyes wide, hands no longer on their weapons. James couldn't believe it. The two crafts weren't just surfacing, they were communicating. Pulses of light rippled between them, like a language made of bioluminescence and sound. The water shimmered around them. And then, without warning, one of the vessels opened. And she was there. The cat. But she wasn't alone. A man stepped out with her, tall, thin, dressed in a suit unlike anything James had ever seen. Metallic thread shimmered through it, and a strange insignia glowed faintly on his shoulder. His face looked human, but not quite. Too smooth. Too symmetrical. His eyes locked onto James's. The man raised a hand. Not in warning. In greeting. But before James could react, one of the black boats fired a shot. Not at him, but at the structure. The noise ripped through the air, and everything exploded into chaos. The cat darted back inside the vessel. The glowing structure responded instantly, sending out a shockwave that knocked the attacking speedboat backward. James's boat was caught in the edge of it and tossed to the side, slamming into the swell. Water surged over the deck. He barely held on. The man in the strange suit disappeared. 1 second he was there, the next, gone, like he'd stepped between dimensions. The second vessel sealed shut, sinking just as fast as it rose. And just like that, they were gone. The other speedboats turned and fled. No attempt to recover anything. No effort to pursue. They retreated like scared dogs. James, soaked and shaken, slumped against the railing. His boat drifted slowly. The radio crackled once more, but this time, it didn't speak. It only played a soft, pulsing hum, the same rhythm the vessels had shared. A message. Or maybe a warning. He looked back at the water. Calm again. Silent. But it was no longer just the ocean to him. He now knew there was something else out here. Watching. Protecting. Testing. And maybe, just maybe, choosing. James had come out looking for fish, and instead, he'd stepped into a conflict far greater than anything he could have imagined, one involving secret naval operations, unidentified underwater vessels, and a cat that seemed to hold the key to it all. The real question wasn't what the cat was anymore. It was. Why did it choose him? James sat slumped on the deck of his boat, still trembling from the encounter. The ocean, which had moments ago roared like it was alive, had gone silent again. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind of quiet that followed something enormous, like the breath the world takes before shifting. He watched the last ripple disappear, unsure if he'd dreamed the entire thing. But the hum in the radio remained, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Proof that something had happened. Something very real. He turned the dial slowly, listening for anything familiar, but the only sound was that low rhythmic pulse. Then, out of nowhere, it stopped. And a voice spoke. It wasn't the one from earlier, it was deeper, clear, and calm. James Carter. Stand by. Extraction inbound. His name. James staggered to his feet, unsure if he should be scared or relieved. He hadn't told anyone where he was. He didn't even have tracking turned on. He looked around the sky, scanning for helicopters. Nothing. Then, from beneath the waves, the water shifted again, but this time, it wasn't the sleek vessels from before. It was something else. Rising from the depths was a craft larger than anything James had ever seen, round, smooth, and glowing with the same bioluminescent light. It made no sound, just a perfect vertical ascent until it hovered inches above the surface. A panel slid open, and a platform extended, stopping inches from the edge of James's boat. "Step aboard," the voice said. James hesitated. He didn't know what was inside, or who was waiting, but he knew he didn't have a choice. Not after everything he'd seen. He stepped onto the platform, heart hammering. As he crossed the threshold into the vessel, he expected darkness, but was met with soft light, like dawn breaking behind fog. The air smelled faintly of salt and something floral. It wasn't like any machine he'd ever stepped into. Inside stood the man he'd seen earlier, the one with the perfect features and metallic suit. But now he wasn't alone. To James's shock, the cat was there too, sitting calmly by the man's feet, grooming herself as if nothing had happened. "We've been watching," the man said, his voice perfectly even. "You passed the trial." James blinked. "Trial?" The man nodded. "The ocean is a boundary. Between what you know and what remains hidden. Few cross it and return changed. Fewer still are chosen." "Chosen for what?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man stepped forward, reaching out a hand, not in threat, but in invitation. "To protect what lies beneath. To help the surface understand what it's forgotten. Balance must be restored, and you, by choosing compassion in the face of danger, proved yourself ready." James stared at him. "This is about the cat." The man actually smiled. "She is more than she appears. She is a messenger, an anchor. Her presence was a test of empathy. Most would have ignored her. You risked your life." Before James could respond, the room dimmed slightly. A panel to the left shimmered and revealed live footage, naval ships entering the harbor back home, swarming the coastline. Helicopters hovered. Submarines surfaced. It looked like a full military alert. "They're responding to what they don't understand," the man said softly. "Fear is louder than truth." James watched in disbelief. His small act of kindness, saving a lone cat in the middle of nowhere, had triggered a response from forces he couldn't begin to comprehend. But the real twist hit him when the cat stood, padded over to him, and let out a long, low meow. And spoke. Her voice was clear, not in words, but in his mind. Images, thoughts, emotion flowed into him all at once. Memories that weren't his. Oceans lit with color, civilizations beneath the sea, and a warning. A great imbalance rising, pollution, greed, chaos above disturbing the silence below. She was part of something ancient. A guardian. Sent up to find someone who could bridge both worlds. And James had passed. He staggered back, breath caught in his throat. "I'm just a fisherman," he whispered. The cat's voice answered gently, "That's why you were chosen." The vessel shifted, and the glowing wall displayed his harbor again, his dock, his old boat, the same one nearly shattered by that careless luxury yacht. Except now, beside it, another boat waited. Sleek, modern, unlike anything on the market. It looked like it could outrun a storm without even raising anchor. "It's yours now," the man said. "A tool. A start. There is much to be done." Before James could reply, the room shimmered once more. Everything, cat, man, light, began to fade. He was back on his boat. But it wasn't the same. It was repaired. Upgraded. Sleek panels replaced broken boards. Digital screens blinked where rusted gauges once were. And the cat? She sat calmly on the bow, tail flicking. Back at the harbor, the Navy ships held their position. But something had shifted. The water between them shimmered, as though the ocean itself had drawn a line. The radio chirped again. "Harbor command to unidentified vessel. You are cleared to dock." James took the helm, eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew one thing for certain. He hadn't just found a cat. He'd found a purpose. As the new vessel gently cruised into the harbor, James stood at the helm with the wind brushing against his face. The sleek design of the boat turned heads instantly. Neighbors and dockworkers paused mid-task, watching in disbelief as it approached. It didn't just look expensive. It looked unearthly. Lights lined its edges in a soft glow, and the engine was almost silent. But what really drew their attention was the man at the wheel, and the cat sitting proudly by his side like a captain's trusted companion. No one said a word as he docked. The harbor master slowly approached, clipboard in hand, but stopped short when he saw James more clearly. "Carter?" the man asked, blinking. "We thought you were lost. We got Coast Guard reports, they found nothing." What happened out there?" James smiled quietly, unsure of how to answer. "Let's just say the ocean gave more than it took." He gave the harbor master a respectful nod and stepped off the boat. A small crowd had gathered. Fishermen he knew for years, kids on bikes, even tourists peeking out from behind parked cars. Everyone seemed to know something unusual had happened, but no one could quite put it into words. The cat hopped down from the deck and rubbed against the harbor master's leg before walking ahead, as if she owned the place. Over the next few days, James found his story spreading faster than he could contain it. Local news picked up a version of the events: fisherman rescues cat miles from shore in mysterious encounter, and soon reporters began knocking on his door. He gave them little, speaking only about kindness and the strange beauty of the ocean. He left out the part about alien vessels, telepathic cats, and underwater civilizations. But something had changed inside him. He could feel it every morning when he looked at the water. The currents felt different now, almost like they whispered to him. When he took the boat out again, it responded like it knew what he needed before he even touched the controls. The technology embedded in it was beyond anything he'd seen. Silent navigation, automatic storm tracking, self-cleaning surfaces. It was like the boat was alive in its own way. And the cat never left his side. He named her Mira. Sometimes she would stare out into the water for hours, unmoving, and other times she would curl up on the dash while James mapped new routes. People started calling her his good luck charm, but James knew she was more than that. She was a reminder of everything he didn't yet understand, and everything he now had a responsibility to protect. He quietly began cleaning the local beaches, removing trash from the shorelines. At first, no one noticed. Then a few kids started helping him. A small non-profit caught wind of it, and soon donations poured in. What began as a solo effort turned into a community cleanup initiative that spanned the entire coastline. He didn't organize it. He just kept showing up. And people followed. A few months later, a government agency visited him discreetly. They wanted to talk about what he'd seen out at sea. James sat across from them, calm and clear. He didn't lie, but he didn't give them everything either. He spoke of balance, of warnings, and of the need for respect for the oceans, for nature, for the mysteries humans had grown arrogant enough to ignore. One of the agents asked about the cat. James smiled and said, "She found me when I needed her most." That was all he offered. They didn't press. Something about his presence made them back off, like they sensed this man had seen too much to be questioned like a witness. Eventually, they left him alone. Over time, James noticed small things changing. Sea life returning to areas that had once been barren. Waters once murky now sparkling with color. He didn't tell anyone what he suspected, that the ocean itself was healing. That something unseen had been set back into motion. But he knew. Deep down, he knew it had started the day he pulled Mira from the water. One morning, as the sun rose over the waves, Mira sat quietly beside him on the deck. She stared east, her eyes locked on the horizon. James followed her gaze and saw nothing but the endless stretch of ocean. But he knew what she meant. It was time. She turned to him, gave a soft purr, and then leapt from the boat, straight into the water. He panicked at first, standing up fast and calling out, but she didn't sink. She swam gracefully, her body glowing faintly just beneath the surface. And then, as quickly as she had appeared months ago, she was gone, slipping under the waves like she belonged there. James sat down slowly, heart heavy but full. He never saw Mira again. But he kept going. He sailed every day, sometimes to fish, sometimes just to listen. The ocean had given him a second chance, not just at life, but at purpose. He became a quiet legend in town, the man who'd once vanished at sea and returned with a boat that seemed to run on silence and light. Kids grew up hearing his story, often asking if the cat was real. He'd just smile and point to the water. And though the world outside moved on, more obsessed with screens than stars, there were still a few who stopped to look out over the water and wonder. A few who knew the sea held secrets. A few who remembered kindness, even when the rest of the world forgot. James never claimed to be a hero. He didn't want fame or fortune. But every time he cast off from shore and felt the hum of the boat rise beneath him, he knew the ocean hadn't forgotten him either. He had found a cat in the most impossible place, and in doing so, had discovered something far greater. And now, as the sun warmed his weathered face and the waves gently rocked his boat, James knew this truth as clearly as he knew his own name. Sometimes, it's the smallest act of compassion that ripples across the world, and sometimes, it changes everything.